20 years ago, a veteran Navy SEAL walked away from a collapsing fire tower and buried the truth. Now he's back, searching for a missing boy with the only partner who never left him, his dog. What they uncover beneath the forest isn't just bones. It's his past. The town remembers the disappearance, but not the push that started it. As secrets rise, so does the weight of silence he carried for decades. This isn't just a rescue story. It's about guilt, courage, and second chances. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to The Last Command K9. Spring in northern Wisconsin didn't arrive like a celebration. It arrived like a decision the land had made without asking anyone's permission. Ice loosening its grip, sunlight sharpening, the lake returning to its own reflection. Reed Carver drove with the window cracked just enough to let the cold air bite his knuckles on the steering wheel. He was 43 now, 6'1", broad through the shoulders in the quiet way of someone trained to carry weight, gear, men, responsibility, without needing anyone to notice. His face was cut from hard angles, a clean, defined jaw, a close-cropped beard that never grew wild, and blue-gray eyes set deep enough that even in daylight they looked like they'd been built for night operations. His skin held a permanent sun brown, the kind you couldn't wash off with time. The hair was short, dark brown, clipped in a military cut that didn't ask questions. Early silver had threaded his temples, not from age alone, but from a life that had demanded silence on schedule. He wore the same uniform he'd chosen for civilian life, because choosing a new one felt like lying. An olive field jacket with faint wear at the cuffs, a red and deep blue plaid shirt beneath it, dark blue cargo pants, and brown leather boots scuffed by years of gravel, mud, and places that didn't show up on maps. A worn military-style watch sat on his wrist. A folding pocket knife rode clipped inside a pocket. An Eberle stock half-track pack, practical and unshowy, rested in the passenger seat like an old habit. No rifle, no tactical vest, no insignia, not anymore. In the back, Rook shifted as the tires hummed over the last stretch of highway. The German Shepherd was 8, black and tan, short-coated, built lean and strong like an athlete trained for endurance rather than show. His posture was always balanced, weight-centered, ready. His eyes were dark and intelligent, scanning the edges of the road the way a disciplined soldier scanned a ridge line. He wore no armor, no flashy harness, only a simple black leather collar, worn soft with use. Rook didn't bark at passing cars. He didn't whine. He watched. That was what made him dangerous in the right way. Reed hadn't come back to this town for nostalgia. He hadn't come to prove anything. He had come because the phone had rung at 2:11 a.m., and a voice on the other end had said, carefully, like words could detonate, "We've got a missing kid." A 12-year-old boy named Mason Whitaker had vanished while fishing near the North Woods, close to the old fire lookout tower. Abandoned, weathered, and still standing like a finger raised against forgetting. The boy hadn't returned to camp. The family had waited until dusk, then midnight, then panic. Reed's first instinct had been to say no, not because he didn't care, because caring was the quickest way to get dragged under. But then the voice had added, quieter, "Sheriff Morrissey asked for you." She said, "You know the terrain." Reed had stared at the ceiling in his dark apartment, feeling the old reflexes rise. Get up, gear up, move. Not because the past called him, because the present did. Now, as the road narrowed and the pines thickened, the lake appeared between trunks, like a sheet of hammered steel turning blue under the sun. The town sign came next. Faded paint. A name he hadn't spoken in 20 years without tasting something bitter behind his teeth. He drove through streets that looked both smaller and sharper than memory. A diner with new windows. A hardware store with the same crooked porch. A boat ramp crowded with trucks. People noticed his truck. They always did. Not because of the vehicle, because of his face, because of the way he carried himself. Because the town had long memories, and some stories never decayed. Reed parked near the volunteer staging area by the Lakeside Community Hall. As he stepped out, the air smelled of damp soil and budding leaves. Fresh life built on old ground. Rook hopped down behind him, silent and steady. A few heads turned. A few conversations stopped. No one waved. Reed didn't expect them to. 20 years ago, 4 teenagers had disappeared in a single night. Summer of 2005, warm air, laughter, a dare, and then nothing. The search had gone on for weeks. Dogs, helicopters, boats dragging the shallows, posters on every pole. And Reed Carver had been the last person anyone could place near them. He'd been 23 then. Local kid turned volunteer rescue. He'd said what he needed to say. He'd left town before the grief had finished growing teeth. Now he was back, older, harder, and still carrying the same invisible mark. A woman approached with the clipped pace of someone who didn't waste motion. Sheriff Lena Morrissey was 39, fit in a practical way. Strong shoulders under her uniform, boots that looked worn for work, not image. Her brown hair was pulled into a tight tie at the back of her head, and her expression had the clean, guarded fairness of someone who had learned to doubt everyone equally. Her eyes met Reed's without warmth, but without fear. "Carver," she said. "Morrissey," Reed answered. They didn't shake hands. There were histories that didn't need ceremony. She gestured toward the map spread across a folding table. "Kid's name is Mason Whitaker, 12. Brown hair, freckles, skinny build. Last seen at the access trail near the North Shore. His dad thought he'd just gone farther down the bank." Her voice stayed professional, but Reed caught the faint tension underneath, like someone holding a heavy door shut. "Any medical issues?" he asked. "None reported." She glanced at Rook. "Dogs certified?" Reed nodded. "SAR trained. Works scent and stress trails." Rook stood beside Reed, still as a statue, eyes fixed on the tree line like it had insulted him. Sheriff Morrissey's gaze followed Rook's stare. "He's keyed up." "He's reading something," Reed said. Something in Morrissey's expression tightened. "We're not doing ghost stories." Reed almost smiled. "Almost. Me neither." She pointed to the north section of the map. "We've got volunteers sweeping the first mile radius. DNR is sending 2 more units. I want you on the ridgeline trails. Your dog covers ground fast." Reed's throat went dry. The ridgeline trails. Those words opened a door in his memory he hadn't touched in years. He saw, for a fraction of a second, flashlight beams through branches, heard distant laughter, felt the weight of a decision he'd made and never unmade. He swallowed it down like you swallowed cold water in winter. Slowly, so it didn't crack your teeth. "Understood," he said. Morrissey studied him with the kind of scrutiny that wasn't personal, just necessary. "You came fast." "I was close," he lied, because explaining the truth would take too long. She nodded once. "Don't freelance. Don't go off grid. If you find anything, you call it in." Reed's eyes flicked toward the north woods, bright and inviting in the morning light. "Yeah," he said. "I call it in." Rook suddenly stepped forward, nose lifting. His ears angled, not toward voices, not toward movement, but toward something deeper, older. Then he pulled. Not hard. Rook didn't waste strength. He applied pressure with purpose, like a compass needle snapping to north. Reed tightened the leash. Rook. The dog didn't look back. Sheriff Morrissey's jaw clenched. What is it? Reed followed the line of Rook's stare into the trees. There was nothing dramatic out there. No smoke, no screams, no shadowed figures, just forest, fresh green rising against the pale sky. Yet Rook stood as if he'd heard an order. Then the dog did something Reed had only seen a handful of times in the worst moments of his life. Rook froze. Not fear, not confusion. A full body halt, muscles locked, breath controlled, eyes fixed, listening to something that wasn't sound. Reed felt the hairs lift on his forearms. He crouched beside the dog, keeping his voice low. What do you have, buddy? Rook's nostrils flared once, twice. Then he shifted half a step, blocking Reed's path, standing between him and the woods like a barrier. A warning, without noise. Sheriff Morrissey took a slow step closer. He's doing that thing they do when they hit scent? Reed shook his head. Not scent? Then what? Reed didn't have an answer he liked. Because Rook wasn't tracking Mason yet. Rook wasn't searching the trailhead. Rook was reacting to something Reed hadn't even asked him to look for. Something in that direction had already been there before Mason disappeared. Something the dog recognized as wrong. Familiar wrong. And Reed realized, with a quiet heaviness, that the first place Rook wanted to go was not the lake. It was the ridge. Toward the old fire tower. Reed stood slowly. He felt the old pressure in his chest, like a hand closing around a memory. Sheriff, he said carefully, I'm going to start my sweep where you assigned. Morrissey's eyes narrowed. And my dog's telling me that whatever happened to the kid didn't start at the water's edge. Her expression flickered, skepticism wrestling with experience. Then she said sharp, You're not chasing your past, Carver. You're finding a boy. Reed met her gaze. I know. But inside, he wasn't sure he did. They moved out. The path into the woods was sunlit, almost beautiful. Pine shadows striped across the ground, birds cutting through the air like small knives of sound. The forest felt clean, awake, indifferent. Reed's boots sank slightly into thaw-soft soil. He adjusted the half-track straps, the weight settling across his shoulders in a way that felt too familiar. Rook led, leash loose, nose working, eyes scanning. He didn't pull now. He guided. He checked the ground, then the air, then the wind. Reed tried to focus on Mason, a boy, skinny, freckles, probably scared, probably hungry. Reed told himself the boy was alive because he needed that belief to move forward. But every time the trail curved north, every time the ridge rose, Reed felt the old year, 2005, breathing under the new one. He told himself the forest didn't remember. Then Rook stopped again. This time his nose lowered to the ground, and he sniffed a patch of dark soil near a tree root. Then lifted his head and looked directly at Reed. Not like a dog asking permission, like a partner confirming a decision. Reed's pulse kicked, because Rook's eyes weren't just alert, they were certain. Reed exhaled slowly, tasting sap and cold air. The ridgeline was ahead, and somewhere beyond it, hidden in bright spring light, the tower still stood. Reed hadn't truly left this place. He had only paused the sentence. Now the forest was asking him to finish it, one step at a time, without excuses. He tightened his grip on the leash. Okay, he whispered, more to himself than to the dog. Show me. And Rook led him deeper into the trees. The forest in 2025 was green, alive, indifferent. But 20 years earlier, it had been warm and careless in a different way. summer 2005, had pressed down heavy and bright. The kind of heat that made teenagers believe nothing truly bad could survive in daylight. Nathaniel Nate Caro had been 23 then, broad-shouldered even at that age, already carrying himself like someone who had learned to compartmentalize emotion. His beard had been shorter, his jaw tighter, his eyes less hollow. He had not yet gone to war. He had not yet learned the difference between anger and consequence. He had believed that leaving town meant starting over. It did not. They had climbed the old fire tower after sunset. The structure had stood at the crest of the ridge for decades. Weathered cedar steps, rusted bolts, warped planks that complained under weight. It wasn't officially open anymore. That was part of the appeal. 5 of them. Isla Bennett had walked ahead of Nate, her auburn hair catching what little light remained. She had been tall for her age, 5'8", long-limbed, strong in a quiet way. Freckles across her nose, eyes the color of storm glass. She didn't laugh easily, but when she did, it startled people. She had always carried something defiant in her posture. Chin lifted, shoulders squared, as if she were perpetually bracing against someone trying to lower her. She had grown up with less money than most in town, less protection, less patience for secrets. She had also loved Nate in the only way someone young and certain could. Completely. Elias Crowder had followed behind them. At 24, he had already begun to look like a man shaped by inheritance. Tall, lean, clean-shaven, with sharp features and careful hair. His clothes had been more expensive than the rest of theirs, boots that hadn't seen hard labor, a watch his father had given him. His posture was upright but tense, like someone raised under constant evaluation. He had always tried to be reasonable. He had always tried to keep the peace. That night, he had failed. The 3 others, Ben Lawson, thick-shouldered and impulsive, Cara Mendez, small and sharp-tongued, and Tyler Briggs, quiet and perpetually half-amused, had trailed them up the steps. They had known something. Not everything, but enough. Earlier that week, Isla had shown Nate paperwork she'd found in the county archives, insurance claims filed by Crowder Timber after a brush fire on private land. The dates didn't align with burn permits. The fire had been small, controlled, profitable. Isla had said, "Someone said it on purpose." Nate had wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding. That night on the tower, Elias had tried to explain. "It wasn't like that," he'd said, hands raised, voice tight. "You don't understand how this town works." Isla had stepped closer, her jaw set. "I understand perfectly. People like your father get to break rules because no one wants to look too hard." The wind had been stronger at the top of the ridge. The boards beneath them creaked. Nate had felt something building, pressure not just in the conversation, but in himself. He had been tired of watching Isla fight battles alone, tired of feeling like he stood between worlds, 1 foot in the town, 1 foot outside it. "Just stop," he'd said to Elias. Elias had stepped into Isla's path when she moved toward the stairs. "I'm asking you not to go to the sheriff," Elias had insisted. "You don't know what that would do." "What it would do," Isla snapped, "is make someone accountable." Nate remembered the heat in his chest more clearly than the words. He remembered stepping forward. He remembered Elias reaching out, not to strike, but to restrain. And he remembered pushing. It had not been a haymaker, not a punch, just a hard shove meant to create space. Elias stumbled back. Isla grabbed his arm to steady him. The board behind them splintered. There had been a sound, sharp, brittle, final. Then nothing beneath their feet. They disappeared in a collapse of wood and dust. Silence swallowed the ridge. In the present, Reed's boots slowed along the trail. The memory did not come like a cinematic flashback. It came in pieces, jagged and inconvenient. Rook worked the ground steadily, nose tracing faint impressions in soil that had seen decades of weather. The dog's body language remained controlled, professional. Weight forward, tail low but not tucked. Ears tracking sound beyond human range. Reed inhaled slowly, grounding himself in the present. He had not known they were dead. That was the story he'd told himself. After the collapse, he had rushed to the broken edge and called their names. No answer. Only darkness and the smell of damp earth. The drop had been deeper than expected, behind the tower where erosion had carved a hidden pocket into the ridge. Ben and Kara had panicked. Tyler had shouted that when no one did, fear had taken over. When no one did, fear had taken over logic. And fear always rewrites memory. As Reed moved forward in the present, Rook suddenly lifted his head, not toward the ground this time, but toward the air. The dog's body stiffened, not in alarm, but in recognition. Then Rook turned, not toward the tower, but slightly east, toward a thinner stretch of trees. Reed felt it before he understood it. That direction wasn't where Mason had been last seen. It was where someone would have gone to avoid being seen. Rook took 3 slow steps and then looked back at Reed, eyes unwavering. Not confusion, not curiosity, certainty. For a second, Reed felt as if the forest itself were pointing. He hadn't told anyone what truly happened on the ridge that night, but the dog, who had not been alive in 2005, was reacting as if something about that place still carried weight. Reed swallowed. "All right," he murmured. "We check it." The leash slackened. They shifted course. Back in 2005, chaos had replaced argument. Ben had run down the tower steps to circle around. Kara had shouted Isla's name until her voice cracked. Tyler had tripped on loose gravel and scraped his palms raw. Nate had stood frozen for a second too long. Then he had done something he would replay for years. He had stepped back. Not forward. Back. He had told Ben to go get help. He had told Kara to find flashlights. He had told himself he would come back. He did not. Instead, he had walked halfway down the ridge alone, heart hammering, mind racing through worst-case scenarios. He imagined headlines, lawsuits, jail, his father's disappointment, Isla's fury. He had not imagined a funeral. When the sun rose and Isla still hadn't returned home, the search began. Nate had said he left before the argument escalated. He had not mentioned the push, because a shove was not a killing, because admitting it would make the collapse feel intentional, because guilt grows faster in daylight. In 2025, Reed and Rook reached a narrow patch of ground that sloped toward a shallow basin choked with brush. The soil here was darker. Rook lowered his nose and circled once. Then he pawed gently at a patch near a tree root. Reed crouched. There, half hidden beneath leaves, was a depression in the earth that did not match natural erosion. It was recent, not 20 years old, weeks, maybe days. Reed's jaw tightened. Mason hadn't created that. Someone else had been here. He scanned the perimeter. No obvious footprints, but the ground was soft enough that weight had shifted it. The forest held its breath. Behind him a voice called out, "Carver!" Reed stood. Deputy Aaron Doyle emerged from the underbrush, a man in his early 30s, stocky, with sandy hair cut too short and a permanent sunburn across his nose. His uniform fit like it had been issued quickly and worn hard. He carried himself with the eager tension of someone who wanted to prove competence. Sheriff wants updates every 20, Doyle said, slightly winded. His eyes flicked to Rook. Dog hit something? Not sure yet, Reed replied evenly. Doyle's gaze lingered on him a second too long. You know, Doyle added, voice careful. My dad was on the search team back then. He used to say the woods swallowed those kids whole. Reed didn't answer, because he knew better. The woods hadn't swallowed them. They had fallen, and someone had walked away. By late afternoon in 2005, sirens and helicopters filled the sky. Sheriff Harold Morrissey, Lena's father, had stood with arms crossed, gray mustache bristling, eyes scanning Nate with quiet suspicion. Tell me again, he had said. What happened? Nate had repeated his edited version. He had watched Isla's mother collapse onto a folding chair near the command post. He had felt something crack in his chest. But he had not spoken. Not then. In 2025, Reed brushed soil aside carefully. Not digging, just confirming. The disturbed ground extended outward, faint but deliberate. Rook's muscles remained taut. This was not just about a boy lost by water. Someone had returned to this ridge before Mason disappeared. Someone who knew exactly where to step. Reed straightened slowly. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows through the trees. 20 years ago, he had told himself the collapse was an accident. He had told himself leaving was temporary. He had told himself silence protected everyone. Standing there now, in the same forest that had once echoed with Isla's voice, he understood something he had avoided for 2 decades. The shove had not killed her, but it had changed the direction of everything. And whatever was happening now, whatever Mason had stumbled into, was not random. Reed clipped the leash tighter. We're not done here, he said, quietly. Rook did not look back. He moved forward. By late afternoon, the ridge no longer felt like an empty place. It felt occupied. Not by people, by consequence. Reed stood back as the forensic team marked off the disturbed soil behind the old fire tower. The structure loomed above them, skeletal and weathered, its wood bleached silver by decades of wind. Sunlight filtered through broken slats, falling in narrow beams across the clearing like interrogation lights. Sheriff Lena Morrissey moved with precise control, her boots cutting firm lines in the damp ground. Up close, the tension in her posture was clearer. Shoulders tight, jaw locked just a fraction too hard. She had inherited her father's eyes, the kind that assessed before trusting. But unlike him, there was no mustache to hide behind, no small-town familiarity to soften her edges. She carried herself like someone who had grown up inside a case file she never asked for. Perimeter holds, she told her deputies. Nobody crosses tape unless you're on record. Her voice did not tremble. But Reed noticed her hands remained inside her jacket pockets longer than necessary. The first bone fragment had been small, a pale arc emerging from peat-dark soil where runoff from the marsh had shifted the ground over the winter. Rook had alerted with a low, controlled focus. No barking, no dramatic gesture, just a tightening of stance and a stillness that had pulled Reed forward. Now, there were more markers. White flags against black earth. Dr. Marla Henson arrived just before dusk. She stepped out of the county van with deliberate care, brushing loose strands of silver blonde hair behind one ear. She was in her early 50s, medium height, angular face softened by long years of professional restraint. Her glasses caught the light as she surveyed the clearing. There was something about her composure, calm but not cold, that suggested she had seen worse and still believed in process. "Sheriff," she greeted, voice even. "Dr. Henson." Marla crouched carefully near the first exposed fragment. She wore thin gloves and spoke quietly, but everyone listened. "This is not recent," she said. "Cortical density suggests late adolescence or young adult. Exposure is new, displacement likely due to shifting water table." Reed felt the words settle like stones. Late adolescence, young adult. 20 years ago, that ridge had swallowed more than memory. Another fragment emerged under careful excavation. Then another. The soil had preserved what air would have destroyed. By full sunset, they confirmed what the town had feared for 2 decades. 2 individuals. Not animals. Not debris. Human remains. Word spread faster than wind. Reed watched from the edge of the clearing as headlights gathered near the trail access. Some people stayed in their trucks. Others stood in clusters, whispering. Among them, a woman stepped forward with slow, measured steps. Catherine Bennett, Isla's mother. Time had narrowed her frame, but not broken it. She was tall, still elegant in posture, even at 65. Her once auburn hair had faded to copper gray, pulled back in a loose knot. Her skin bore fine lines that had not been earned by laughter. She wore a long navy coat and gloves, despite the mild spring air, as if bracing against cold that never left her. Her eyes locked onto the ridge, not on Reed, on the tower. Reed did not approach her. He did not deserve to. Sheriff Morrissey walked toward Catherine instead, speaking low, explaining what they could confirm and what would require testing. Catherine listened without interrupting. When she nodded, it was not acceptance. It was acknowledgement of inevitability. Reed's throat tightened. Rook remained seated at his side, posture upright but calm. The dog's ears flicked occasionally toward distant voices, but he did not break position. There was no triumph in this discovery, only gravity. Across the clearing, another figure appeared, Elias Crowder. He walked with the careful restraint of a man who understood that every step was being measured. At 45, he had filled out into a solid build, still lean but stronger through the shoulders than he had been at 24. His face remained sharp, clean-shaven, his hair trimmed neatly with a precision that bordered on control. He wore a charcoal technical jacket, dark trousers, and hiking boots that looked new but unscuffed, as if purchased for appearance rather than terrain. When his eyes landed on the flags marking bone, something in his composure faltered, not theatrically, just a flicker. Then it was gone. Sheriff Morrissey approached him. "Mr. Crowder." He inclined his head slightly. "Sheriff." His voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of someone accustomed to negotiating contracts rather than confessing history. "This area is under investigation," Lena said. "I heard," Elias replied. "It's unfortunate." Unfortunate. The word lingered in the air like smoke. Reed studied him carefully. 20 years earlier, Elias had clawed his way out of a collapsing edge, blood running from a gash near his temple. He had not looked smooth then. He had looked terrified. Now he looked controlled. Too controlled. As deputies continued securing the site, Rook suddenly rose from his seated position. Not abrupt, intentional. He moved 10 paces away from the dig area, toward a patch of brush slightly downhill. He did not paw at the ground this time. He stood facing outward, toward the tree line beyond the ridge, body angled as if guarding something unseen. Reed followed. "Rook!" The dog did not break posture. His gaze fixed on a narrow opening between trees where the undergrowth bent unnaturally. Not crushed from years ago, recently. Rook's ears twitched once. Then he let out the faintest breath through his nose, almost a warning. Reed's pulse shifted. The remains were old. But the disturbance in the trees was not. Someone had stood there recently, watching, and Rook knew it. Sheriff Morrissey noticed the movement. "What is it?" Reed nodded toward the gap in the foliage. "Traffic, not search team." Lena's expression hardened. She signaled to Deputy Doyle, who jogged over. "Check that perimeter," she ordered. Doyle hesitated. "You think someone came back?" "I think someone didn't want this found," Reed said quietly. Elias's head turned at that. Just slightly. Enough. The forensic van lights cast pale beams across the ridge as night deepened. Portable generators hummed softly. Evidence bags were sealed, labeled, documented. Dr. Henson stood and removed her gloves. "We'll know more after lab confirmation," she said. "But given the timeline and location, I suspect these match the 2005 disappearance." Sheriff Morrissey nodded. Reed felt the ground shift inside him. Not physically, internally. He remembered the sensation of pushing. He remembered the heat in his chest. But now he remembered something else, the resistance. Elias's jacket under his palm. The way Isla's hand had grabbed Elias. Not to fight him, but to steady him. Reed exhaled sharply. The memory had edges he hadn't allowed before. It wasn't just a shove. It had been forceful, anger-fueled, and that detail had been buried with the bones. Deputy Doyle returned from the tree line. "Fresh boot impressions," he reported. "Size 11, maybe 12, not ours." Sheriff Morrissey's gaze flicked to Elias's boots. Dark, unmarked, hard to tell. "Anyone else authorized near this site in the last week?" Lena asked. Doyle shook his head. Elias cleared his throat lightly. "My company surveys that quadrant occasionally," he said. "Timber evaluation." Sheriff Morrissey's eyes sharpened. "Recently?" Elias hesitated half a second too long. "Routine check last month," he answered. Reed did not speak, but he watched. And Rook continued facing the forest. By full dark, the remains were secured for Martian transport. Catherine Bennett remained until the last evidence marker was removed. She did not cry publicly. She did not collapse. She stood upright, hands clasped as if refusing to grant the forest any more victory. When she finally turned to leave, her gaze passed briefly over Reed. Not accusation, not forgiveness, recognition. She knew he had been there that night. Whether she knew more than that remained unclear. Reed lowered his eyes first. Rook stayed close, brushing his flank lightly against Reed's leg. A grounding pressure. The ridge grew quiet again once the generators shut down. Sheriff Morrissey approached Reed one last time before heading out. "You remember more than you've said," she stated, not asked. Reed held her gaze. "Yes." She studied him for a long moment. "Then you'd better decide what you're going to do with it." No threat, just fact. She turned and walked toward her cruiser. The clearing emptied. Only moonlight remained. Reed stood beneath, the tower. The boards above creaked softly in the cooling air. 20 years ago, he had walked away from this ridge and convinced himself silence protected everyone. Now, 2 bodies had surfaced because water levels changed, because soil shifted, because time refuses to stay buried. Rook sat beside him, steady, unblinking. The forest was not finished, and neither was he. The night after the discovery did not settle. It pressed. By morning, the town was no longer whispering. It was loud in the quiet way small towns become loud. Through half-closed diner doors, through grocery aisles where conversations stopped mid-sentence, through phone screens lighting up with speculation. Reed had barely slept. Rook had. The German Shepherd lay stretched across the motel room floor at dawn. black and tan coat catching pale light through thin curtains. 8 years old now, still muscular, compact, steady in breath. Even asleep, his ears flicked at hallway noise. His jaw twitched once as if tracking scent in dreams. Reed sat on the edge of the bed, boots already laced, field jacket zipped halfway. His beard was rougher this morning, eyes rimmed red, not from exhaustion alone, but from something heavier resurfacing. His phone vibrated. Sheriff Lena Morrissey's name flashed. "Talk to me," Reed answered. "We've got new information," she said. Her voice was clipped, controlled, but beneath it ran a current of urgency. Mason didn't just wander. Reed stood. "What do you mean?" "He sent a photo yesterday afternoon, to a friend, of something he found near the ridge." Reed's pulse shifted. What kind of something? There was a pause. "Bone." Mason Whitaker was 12. Thin, long-limbed in the awkward way of boys caught between childhood and growth spurts. Brown hair perpetually in his eyes, freckles across his cheeks, front tooth slightly chipped from a bike accident the previous summer. He had the kind of curiosity that made adults nervous, always looking under things, into things. His friend Caleb Porter, 13, heavier set, round-faced, anxious, had shown the photo to his older sister that evening. She had shown it to someone else. By nightfall, half the school had seen it. A pale fragment in dark mud. Rumors spread faster than facts, and rumors travel, especially to men who have something to lose. Elias, Crowder had heard by early evening. His assistant, Miranda Cole, a tall, sharp-featured woman in her early 30s with ash-blonde hair cut blunt at the shoulders, had mentioned it casually during a paperwork review. Miranda was efficient, emotionally contained, loyal to structure more than to people. She processed information the way accountants process numbers. "Some kid's claiming he found human remains near the tower," she'd said, not looking up from her tablet. Elias had gone still. He had built Crowder Timber into a regional operation over the past decade. Strategic acquisitions, controlled expansion, clean public image. He attended town fundraisers, sponsored Little League, rebranded the company logo to emphasize sustainability. He had buried the past carefully, or thought he had. That night, he drove alone. No company truck, no official record. Just his dark SUV headlights off once he reached the dirt access road. The ridge looked unchanged in the dusk, but he knew better. He moved toward the marsh edge, boots sinking slightly into wet ground. He found the exposed fragment where the boy must have stood. His breath shortened. He knelt. The bone was unmistakable. He did not think of guilt first. He thought of fallout. If the remains were identified, questions would reopen, statements revisited. His father's name dragged through reports again. He scanned the area. No one. He picked up a nearby fallen branch and began pushing mud over the fragment. Not digging, covering. He told himself he was preventing hysteria. He told himself it was temporary. He did not hear Mason until it was too late. "What are you doing?" The voice cracked slightly, high, young, trembling. Elias froze. He turned slowly. Mason stood 10 yards away, phone in hand, breath uneven. His eyes were wide, not just scared, but betrayed. "You're not supposed to touch that," Mason said. Elias stood carefully. "This is dangerous ground," he replied, tone controlled. "You shouldn't be here." "You're covering it," Mason whispered. Elias stepped forward once. Mason stepped back. The marshland behind him dipped gradually toward the northern flats, an area locals avoided. The soil there looked solid until it wasn't. "I was going to tell the sheriff," Mason said. Elias's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're talking about." Mason's fear sharpened into instinct. He turned and ran, not toward the trail, toward the north. Elias took 2 steps after him, then stopped, because he recognized where the boy was heading. That was the sink basin. That was where the collapse had led. 20 years earlier, his breath left him in a shallow exhale. He did not follow. He stood and listened. But the forest swallowed sound quickly. In the present, Reed knelt where Mason's footprints diverged from the known trail. Rook moved in tight arcs, nose close to ground, tracking not decay, but adrenaline. Human fear leaves a different trace. The dog's body grew taut, breath shorter but controlled. Then, without warning, Rook broke from the pattern and angled sharply north. Reed followed, heart accelerating. The air shifted subtly, cooler, heavier. The soil underfoot softened, and then Reed felt it. A faint suction against his right boot. He shifted weight. The ground dipped. Rook barked once, sharp, urgent. Reed looked down. The earth was not earth. It was slurry. He stepped back. Too late. His left leg plunged mid-calf into dark mud. Cold, immediate. He tried to withdraw. The suction deepened. His pulse spiked. For one blinding second, memory overlaid reality. Wood splintering, Isla falling, his own hand pushing. This time, the ground was taking him. Reed leaned back, attempting to redistribute weight. It only worsened the angle. The marsh swallowed quietly. He forced himself still. "Rook," he said, low and steady. The German shepherd did not panic. He moved behind Reed, teeth catching the thick fabric strap at the back of the field jacket. He planted his paws wide, muscles engaging. Reed shifted weight forward slightly to give the dog leverage. The suction resisted, then gave. Not all at once, in slow increments. Mud released his leg with a sick sound. Rook pulled again, adjusting grip. Reed rolled sideways onto firmer ground, chest heaving. The dog released only when Reed's weight stabilized. For a moment they stayed there, Reed on his back, staring at the sky through trembling branches. 20 years ago, no one had pulled Isla. This time something had. Rook stood over him briefly, eyes locked, checking. Then the dog turned, not toward safety, forward, north. He had chosen the man over the trail. Now he chose the boy. Reed rose slowly, wiping mud from his cargo pants. His boots felt heavier, soaked. "All right," he murmured. Rook resumed tracking. The basin grew thicker, reeds rising waist-high. Patches of deceptive ground shimmered under thin water film. 30 yards ahead, a shape moved. Small, collapsed. Reed approached carefully. Mason lay on his side, half caked in mud, breathing shallow but steady. His face streaked with tears and dirt. His hands trembled uncontrollably. He wasn't submerged, just exhausted. Rook slowed his approach, posture softening. He lowered his head slightly, ears back, not submissive, but calming. Mason flinched at first, then focused. "You're real," he whispered hoarsely. "Yeah," Reed answered. "We are." Mason's eyes filled again, not with fear this time, but relief so sharp it hurt to witness. "He was there," Mason rasped. "He was covering it." Reed did not ask who, he already knew. He crouched, checking for injury. No fractures obvious, pulse rapid but strong. "You're going home," Reed said. Mason nodded weakly. Rook remained close, scanning perimeter once more before stepping beside the boy, not guarding the forest, guarding him. By the time they emerged from the basin, deputies were moving through the outer trail. Sheriff Morrissey reached them first. Her composure cracked only briefly when she saw Mason upright. "You're all right?" she demanded. He nodded. Reed's gaze met hers. "He didn't just wander," Reed said quietly. Lena understood. Across the clearing, beyond flashing lights and gathering personnel, Elias Crowder stood near his vehicle, still, watching. But this time, control had fissures. Reed felt something settle inside him, not resolution, alignment. 20 years ago, he had walked away. Today, he had not. And the ground, for once, had given something back. The town no longer pretended this was just a search and rescue story. It was an investigation now. And investigations peel layers whether people are ready or not. 3 days after Mason was found alive, the county medical examiner's office released preliminary findings. Sheriff Lena Morrissey requested Reed's presence at the station. Not as a suspect, not yet, but as someone who had been there when the ground first shifted. The sheriff's office in Cedar Hollow was modest. Brick exterior, fluorescent lighting inside that hummed faintly overhead. The walls held framed photos of past sheriffs, her father's included. His portrait, taken 20 years ago, showed a man confident in his authority. Lena avoided looking at it longer than necessary. Dr. Marla Henson sat at the conference table when Reed entered. She had exchanged her field jacket for a gray wool blazer. Her silver blonde hair was pinned back more tightly today. Glasses perched low on her nose as she reviewed a folder of photographs and lab reports. She didn't smile. "Sit," she said gently. Reed did. Rook lay beside his chair, disciplined, still, amber eyes tracking movement, but not intruding. Dr. Henson opened the file. "The skeletal remains show perimortem trauma," she began. "Fractures consistent with impact, likely from a fall. But there are additional indicators." She slid a photograph across the table. "See here," she said, tapping a highlighted section. "Compression fractures not entirely aligned with free fall dynamics. There was force before the collapse." Reed's throat tightened. "Force how?" "Blunt force consistent with a shove, or struggle." The room felt smaller. Lena leaned back slowly, absorbing it. "So," she said carefully, "the collapse wasn't the only cause?" "No," Marla confirmed. "The injuries began before ground displacement." Reed exhaled through his nose. The memory he had avoided was no longer internal. It was anatomical. Elias Crowder was summoned that afternoon. He arrived in a Navy suit this time, more formal than his forest attire. The jacket fit precisely across his shoulders. His expression was measured, but the skin beneath his eyes showed faint, dark crescents that hadn't been there years ago. He sat across from Lena in interview room 2. Reed waited outside at first. The room was simple. Metal table, 2 chairs, a recording device. The fluorescent light overhead cast no shadows to hide behind. "Mr. Crowder," Lena began, voice steady. "You were present on the ridge in 2005. "Yes." "You were one of the 5 who climbed the tower." "Yes." "And you survived." Elias swallowed once. "Yes." She didn't raise her voice. "Dr. Henson's findings indicate there was physical altercation before the collapse." Elias looked down briefly, fingers interlaced. "There was an argument," he said. "About the fire?" His jaw flexed. "Yes." "The illegal burn for insurance compensation?" Silence. "That was never proven," Elias said carefully. "But it was true," Lena replied. Elias's composure faltered for half a second. Reed watched through the observation window. He saw something in Elias's posture he hadn't seen in years. Wait. Lena allowed a pause to stretch. "Mr. Crowder, we can do this the long way or the short way." Elias closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "There was a shove," he said quietly. Lena didn't move. "From who?" she asked. Elias looked toward the mirrored glass, as if he knew Reed was there. Nate, he said. The word landed heavy, but it wasn't the whole truth. And then, Lena pressed. Elias's fingers tightened. We lost footing, the wood gave way. And after the fall, Elias inhaled slowly. I didn't die. That wasn't confession. That was survival. Inside the observation room, Rook suddenly lifted his head, not toward the door, toward Elias's voice, through the speaker. The dog's body stiffened, not in aggression, but in acute awareness. His ears angled forward, his gaze sharpened. He stood slowly, stepping closer to the glass. Reed felt it too. Something in Elias's tone had shifted, not defensive, not angry, haunted. And then Elias said quietly in the other room, My father came. The words changed the temperature. Lena leaned forward slightly. Your father arrived at the ridge? Elias nodded. I crawled out. I don't remember how long it took. I hit my head. I couldn't hear straight. His voice lost its polish. I found Isla and Ben below. They weren't moving. Reed's breath hitched at the confirmation. 2 identified remains, now given names. I went home, Elias continued. I told my father. His father, Thomas Crowder, had been a large man with thick shoulders and a permanent scowl carved by years of command. Gray hair always combed straight back, voice low and authoritative. He had built Crowder Timber from nothing. He believed in legacy over sentiment. And he drove back with me, Elias said. Lena's pen paused. He assessed the situation, Elias continued. He said if authorities found them there, the burn investigation would reopen. And? Lena asked. Elias swallowed. He said the fire permit discrepancies would lead back to him, to us. Reed felt nausea creep up his spine. We moved them, Elias said, voice barely above whisper. The words hung there. You moved the bodies, Lena clarified. Yes. Why not call for help? Elias laughed once, bitter, hollow. Because my father said if we admitted to the burn, the company would collapse. Hundreds of jobs gone, families affected. His eyes lifted finally, meeting Lena's. He said sometimes you sacrifice a few to save the whole. The room went silent. Did you believe him? Lena asked. Elias's voice cracked slightly for the first time. I wanted to. Reed stepped into the interview room then. Lena didn't stop him. Elias looked up. For a moment, they were 23 again. You left, Elias said quietly. Reed didn't deny it. I thought you were dead, Reed replied. I wasn't, Elias answered. The truth settled between them. Not absolution, not accusation. Just reality. Reed's jaw tightened. You could have told them, Reed said. So could you, Elias shot back. Not angrily, but tiredly. The words struck harder than any shout. Lena let them speak, because this wasn't just evidence. It was history surfacing. My father said if this came out, Elias continued, you'd be charged with manslaughter. The burn would expose fraud. The company would implode, the town would suffer. And you believed protecting the town meant burying them, Reed said. Elias looked down. I believed protecting myself meant obeying him. The distinction mattered. Reed studied him carefully. You lived with that, Reed said. Elias nodded. Every day. Not as a murderer, as a coward. Outside, evening light faded across the courthouse lawn. Catherine Bennett stood near the entrance when Elias exited under escort for formal processing. Not arrest yet, but investigation deepened. She didn't speak to him. She didn't need to. Her presence was verdict enough. Reed stepped outside moments later. The air felt colder than it should have in spring. Rook walked beside him, steady, silent. The case had shifted. The bones were no longer mystery. They were testimony. Reed looked toward the ridge in the distance, barely visible beyond rooftops. 20 years ago, he had run from responsibility. Today, he had walked into it. But walking into truth doesn't erase what you did before. It only means you've stopped hiding from it. The investigation would widen. Charges would come. Statements would be recorded. But for now, one thing was undeniable. The silence had been broken, and it had a cost. The town gathered on the lakeshore beneath a sky too clear for morning. Spring sunlight glittered across the water as if unaware of what had finally risen from the ground. Folding chairs lined the grass near the old pier. A modest wooden podium stood at the front, flanked by 2 framed photographs. Isla Bennett at 17, smiling faintly into wind. Ben Lawson, broad-shouldered and squinting against sun. 20 years too late. Reed stood at the back of the crowd. He wore the same olive field jacket, boots cleaned but still scarred from marsh mud. His beard was trimmed but rough, his eyes steady in a way that cost him effort. Rook sat at his side, posture disciplined, tail resting against the grass. The dog's ears flicked at distant gull cries, but returned quickly to neutral focus. Reed had not come for absolution. He had come because not coming would be another form of running. 3 days earlier, he had walked into Sheriff Lena Morrissey's office without being summoned. Station had been quiet that morning, fluorescent lights humming over empty desks. Lena sat at her father's old desk, same wood, same dent near the corner from a long-forgotten coffee mug. She looked up as Reed entered. "I need to amend my statement," he said, before she could speak. She studied him carefully. Lena was 39, tall and athletic in build, brown hair pulled into a low knot at the nape of her neck. There was no softness in her posture, but there was restraint. She had grown up under her father's authority, watched him carry the weight of the 2005 disappearance. It had shaped her, made her skeptical of easy truths. "Sit," she said quietly. Reed didn't sit immediately. "I pushed him," he said instead. Lena didn't blink. "Elias," Reed clarified. "I shoved him, hard." The word hard mattered. "I was angry," Reed continued. "I didn't intend for the floor to collapse, but I created the momentum." Silence lingered. "You understand what you're saying?" Lena replied. "Yes." She gestured toward the chair. "Then say it on record." Reed sat. Rook lowered himself beside him without command. The statement took nearly 2 hours. Reed recounted the argument, the heat in his chest, the physical contact, the crack of wood, the way Isla's hand had reached, not to fight, but to hold Elias steady. He admitted he left before verifying their condition. He admitted he minimized his involvement in his original account. He did not justify it. He did not dramatize it. He described it. When the recorder clicked off, Lena folded her hands. "The statute of limitations for aggravated assault expired years ago," she said. "There isn't sufficient evidence to charge homicide. Your shove alone didn't cause the collapse." Reed nodded. He had not expected prison. That wasn't what kept him awake. After the statement, Reed stepped outside the station into sharp morning light. Rook followed close, but instead of staying at heel, the German shepherd paused at the base of the courthouse steps. His head tilted slightly, not toward the forest this time, but toward the memorial flyers taped to a lamppost. The wind lifted one edge of Isla's photo. Rook stepped closer and pressed his nose briefly against the paper. Not sniffing for scent, not alerting, just touching. Reed felt something in his chest shift, unexpected, almost painful. For 20 years he had avoided looking at her face. The dog, who had never known her, did not look away. Reed reached up and steadied the flyer against the wind. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first honest one. The legal process moved quickly for Elias. He was formally charged with obstruction of justice and unlawful disposal of human remains. Not murder, not manslaughter. The district attorney, Margaret Doyle, Deputy Doyle's aunt, made that clear in her press statement. Margaret Doyle was in her early 60s, iron-gray hair cut sharply at chin, length, posture rigid as if held together by policy itself. She had built her career on measured prosecution, not spectacle. "The evidence supports concealment," she stated, "not direct causation of death." Elias surrendered without resistance. His father, Thomas Crowder, had passed away 5 years earlier from a stroke. That removed one defendant from history, but not responsibility. Elias stood outside the courthouse after arraignment, shoulders squared but eyes hollow. Reporters shouted questions. "Did you move the bodies? Did you pressure witnesses?" He did not answer. When Reed approached, cameras leaned in. "You didn't have to come," Elias said quietly. "Yes, I did," Reed replied. Elias studied him with something like exhausted clarity. "You told them," Elias said. "Yes." Elias nodded once. "Good." There was no sarcasm in it, only fatigue. Back at the Lakeshore Memorial, Catherine Bennett approached the podium. She wore the same navy coat as the day of excavation, though the air was warmer now. Her posture remained upright, hands steady as she adjusted the microphone. "My daughter deserved truth," she began. Her voice did not waver, but it carried weight. "She did not receive it in life," she paused. "But she has it now." Her gaze scanned the crowd. It found Reed. She did not smile. She did not soften. She held his eyes for a full second before continuing. "We cannot undo what was done," she said. "We cannot reclaim 20 years." Her next words were not loud. "We do not owe forgiveness." The statement landed with clarity. Not cruel, not vindictive, simply true. Reed absorbed it without flinching. Forgiveness was never currency he expected. After the service, smaller conversations formed along the water. Mason Whitaker stood near his mother, hands in his jacket pockets. His face looked older now, not in years but in understanding. He had witnessed us something larger than a lost afternoon. When Reed approached, Mason's mother stiffened briefly before recognizing him. "Thank you," she said quietly. Reed nodded. Mason looked at Rook first, then at Reed. "You didn't quit," Mason said. Reed considered the words. "No," he answered. It was the simplest truth he had spoken in years. As twilight settled, Reed remained by the pier long after most had left. The lake reflected soft orange light. Wind rippled the surface gently. Rook sat beside him, steady and close. "You didn't pull her," Reed murmured, not to the dog, but into open air. "But you pulled me." Rook leaned lightly against his leg. There was no grand redemption in that moment, only balance shifting slightly towards something cleaner. Lena approached quietly from behind. "It's going to be messy," she said. Reed nodded. "It already is." She studied him. "My father suspected more," she admitted. "He never proved it." Reed didn't ask if that meant she blamed him. It didn't matter. "I should have stayed," he said. "Yes," Lena replied. Not accusation, agreement. They stood in silence for a moment. The town would not forget. Records would show obstruction charges. Headlines would archive the scandal. But legal resolution was not moral restoration. Reed understood that now. The shove had not been murder. But it had been enough. Enough to fracture wood, enough to fracture lives. He could not repair what had happened in 2005. He could only decide how he stood in 2025. As darkness deepened over the lake, Rook rose first. The dog turned toward the parking lot, posture calm, forward. Reed followed. For once, he was not running. Spring returned again. 1 full year had passed since the ridge gave back what it had hidden. The funerals were not rushed this time. Isla Bennett and Ben Lawson were laid to rest in the old cemetery overlooking Cedar Lake, where the wind moved through tall grass in low, steady waves. The coffins were closed. The headstones were simple. Names carved cleanly, dates finally complete. Closure is a word towns use carefully. This was not closure. It was acknowledgement. Cedar Hollow did not return to what it had been. It split. Some residents spoke of Reed Caro with measured respect now. He came forward, they would say at the hardware store counter. He could have stayed quiet. Others did not soften. He waited 20 years, one older man muttered outside the diner. That's not courage. That's timing. Both statements held weight. Reed didn't argue with either. He had stopped defending himself. He had stopped explaining. He stayed. That was new. He rented a small cabin near the edge of town instead of returning to the motel. It was nothing dramatic. Wood siding faded gray, a porch that sagged slightly at one corner, a narrow path leading down to the tree line. The forest began only 50 yards beyond the back fence. Rook adapted quickly. The German shepherd, now 9 years old, still held his lean, disciplined frame. His black and tan coat showed faint silver along the muzzle. He moved more deliberately than before, not slower, but measured. Experience had replaced impulse. Each morning he sat at the cabin threshold until Reed stepped out first. Not obedience. Partnership. Reed resumed his volunteer search and rescue work officially. There was resistance at first. The SAR coordinator, Hank Madsen, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with wind-burned skin and a thick mustache, grayed unevenly, had hesitated before signing the approval form. Hank had known Reed since he was a teenager. He'd been one of the volunteer firefighters who searched the ridge in 2005. That history sat between them like an unspoken ledger. "You understand some families aren't comfortable," Hank said plainly. "I do," Reed replied. "And you're staying anyway?" "Yes." Hank studied him a long moment. "Then do the work. Quietly." Reed nodded. He didn't ask for trust. He earned it incrementally. One missing hiker, one overdue boater, one disoriented hunter at a time. Not everyone avoided him. Mason Whitaker did not. The boy had grown taller over the year, limbs filling out, voice dropping unevenly into adolescence. The sharp fear that once clouded his eyes had been replaced with something steadier. He had joined the junior volunteer program. One afternoon, Reed found him practicing map orientation at the community center. "You're serious about this?" Reed asked. Mason nodded. "You didn't quit," the boy said simply. "So I'm not either." Reed didn't smile, but something softened behind his eyes. Rook lay beside them on the polished floor, head resting between paws, watching the boy's hands move across the map. When Mason misaligned the compass, Rook's ears flicked, not correcting, but noticing. There was no lecture from Reed, just guidance. Late that summer, Reed returned alone to the old fire tower. Not to investigate, not to relive, just to stand there. The structure had been stabilized by the county. Loose boards replaced, supports reinforced. A plaque now sat at the base, small but deliberate. In memory of Isla Bennett and Ben Lawson. Truth matters. Rook walked beside him up the steps. The wood did not creak the way it used to. Halfway up, Reed felt an instinctive tightening in the leash hand he no longer consciously noticed. He paused. Rook did not pull. He did not hesitate. He climbed steadily, ears forward, but calm. At the top, the wind moved cleanly across the ridge. 20 years ago, the place had felt like a fracture. Now it felt exposed. He stepped toward the railing. He looked down into the basin where the earth had once swallowed secrets. Nothing stirred. He waited. Rook stood beside him, gaze sweeping the horizon. No tension, no warning, no resistance. For the first time since returning to Cedar Hollow, the leash between them remained slack. Not because the forest was empty, but because the forest was no longer hiding anything. Autumn brought colder air and clearer edges. Crowder Timber restructured under new management. Elias had accepted a plea agreement, probation, community restitution, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The company downsized, but did not collapse. Some workers blamed him for instability. Others blamed his father's legacy. Elias remained in town, not out of pride, out of obligation. Reed saw him occasionally at the grocery store or post office. Their exchanges were brief, neutral. Two men carrying different versions of the same night, neither seeking absolution from the other, Catherine. Bennett visited the tower once that fall. Reed happened to be there, repairing a loose railing under county supervision. She approached quietly. Up close, the lines on her face had deepened, not from anger, but from endurance. Her copper-gray hair caught the light, wind pulling strands loose. "You stayed," she said. "Yes." She looked toward the plaque. "She would have hated the silence more than the fall," Catherine said softly. Reed nodded. "I know." She did not forgive him. She did not condemn him either. "I don't know if I'll ever stop being angry," she said. "You don't have to," Reed replied. She studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Not reconciliation, recognition. Winter came harder that year. Snow layered thick along the ridge, transforming the forest into something almost innocent. The fire tower stood stark against white ground, its shadow long and defined. Search and rescue calls increased. Reed answered every one he could, not to prove anything, not to balance a ledger, but because leaving had never corrected what happened. Staying did not erase it either. But staying prevented repetition. Rook moved slower in snow, paused deliberate against ice crust. When wind cut sharply across open terrain, he angled his body slightly ahead of Reed, not pulling, not guarding, simply aligning. The partnership had shifted over the year. It was no longer about detection. It was about direction. One evening, as they walked the perimeter trail near the basin, Reed stopped at the edge of the old sink area. Snow covered most of it now, smoothed into deceptive flatness. He remembered stepping wrong. He remembered the suction. He remembered teeth gripping fabric and dragging him back. He crouched, brushing snow aside until frozen earth showed beneath. "This is where it could have ended," he murmured. Rook stepped closer, pressing lightly into his side. Not a dramatic gesture, just presence. Reed stood. They turned back toward him. Town. This time, Rook did not angle toward the basin. He did not strain. He walked beside him, pace even. The town never fully agreed on Reed Caro. Some nodded when he passed. Some did not. He was no longer seen as a hero. He was no longer whispered about as a suspect. He was something more complicated, human. He did not receive forgiveness ceremonies. He did not ask for them. He did not leave, and that mattered. On the anniversary of the excavation, a small group gathered at the ridge again. No speeches this time, just quiet. Reed stood at the edge of the clearing, Rook seated beside him. The tower rose behind them, not as a monument to tragedy, but as a marker of transparency. There were no secrets beneath it now, only memory. Reed did not bow his head. He did not close his eyes. He stood upright, present. The wind moved through the trees, carrying nothing hidden. And when they descended the ridge, Rook walked at his side without tension in the leash. No pulling, no warning, just forward motion. For the first time in 20 years, the forest was not a place he feared returning to. It was a place he chose to remain. Sometimes the miracle is not the rescue. Sometimes the miracle is the return. Not the moment someone is pulled from the mud, but the moment a person decides not to run anymore. We often wait for God to change our circumstances, but sometimes He changes our direction instead. A forest does not hide forever. Water shifts, ground settles, truth rises. And maybe that is the quiet miracle, that no matter how long we bury guilt, fear, or regret, God still gives us a second chance to stand where we once fell and choose differently. Redemption is not about being forgiven by everyone. It is about refusing to repeat the same mistake when life gives you the same crossroads. In everyday life, we all have a ridge we avoid, a conversation we postpone, a truth we soften, a moment we wish we could undo. The miracle is not erasing the past. The miracle is the courage to face it. If this story touched something in you, if you believe in second chances, if you believe that silent is not the answer, share this message with someone who needs it. Leave a comment about a moment in your life when you chose to stay instead of walk away. Subscribe to this channel if you believe stories can remind us who we are meant to be. May God watch over you and your family. May He guide your steps when the ground feels uncertain. And may He give you the strength to face your own ridge, not alone, but with grace.